Some people marry for love, others marry for money. But Marcus Reid married Sarah Chen for one reason only: to watch her world crumble piece by piece until there was nothing left but ashes and regret. The irony was that she never saw it coming. How could she? Marcus was perfect. Too perfect, some might say. But Sarah had stopped believing in perfection a long time ago. Stopped believing that good things could happen to someone like her. So when Marcus walked into her life with his charming smile and gentle eyes, she convinced herself it was real. She had to. Because the alternative, that she might spend the rest of her life alone, was too terrifying to consider. Their story began on a rainy Tuesday in October, the kind of day where the sky hangs low and gray, pressing down on the city like a heavy blanket.
Ow.
Sarah was running late for a deposition, her heels clicking frantically against the wet pavement as she tried to balance her briefcase. Umbrella and a coffee that was far too hot to drink, but too expensive to throw away. She was a corporate attorney at one of the most prestigious firms in Seattle, the kind of job that looked impressive on paper, but felt like slowly drowning in an ocean of other people's problems. She didn't see the puddle until it was too late. Her heel caught the edge, and suddenly she was falling, her briefcase flying open, documents scattering across the sidewalk like desperate birds trying to escape the rain. The coffee cup hit the ground and exploded, sending a wave of scalding liquid across her cream-colored blouse. That was when he appeared. Marcus Reid materialized out of the crowd like some kind of urban guardian angel, already kneeling to gather her papers before she could even process what had happened. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with dark hair that fell just right across his forehead and eyes the color of sea glass. He wore an expensive suit that somehow managed to look effortless, and when he smiled at her, Sarah felt something shift in her chest. "I think these belong to you," he said, handing her the stack of papers he had salvaged. His voice was warm, with just a hint of amusement that should have annoyed her, but somehow didn't. Sarah took the documents with shaking hands, acutely aware of the coffee stain spreading across her chest like a blood stain. "Thank you," she managed. "I am such a disaster." "You are not a disaster," Marcus said firmly. "You are having a bad day. There is a difference." It was such a simple thing to say, but something about the way he said it made Sarah want to cry. She couldn't remember the last time someone had been kind to her without wanting something in return. They stood there in the rain for a moment, two strangers connected by an accident and a handful of soggy legal documents. Sarah knew she should leave, should thank him again and hurry to her deposition and forget this ever happened, but she didn't want to. For the first time in months, maybe years, she didn't want to walk away. "Let me buy you another coffee," Marcus said, "to replace the one that sacrificed itself for your sidewalk." Sarah laughed despite herself. "I really should go. I am already late. Then let me buy you dinner instead. Tonight, tomorrow, whenever you have time for disasters." It's like me who make terrible jokes about coffee, and there it was. It's the moment everything changed. The moment Sarah Chen made the decision that would alter the entire trajectory of her life. She looked at this stranger with his kind eyes and perfect smile, and she said yes. What Sarah didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that their meeting wasn't an accident. Marcus had been following her for 3 weeks, learning her routine, studying her patterns. He knew she bought coffee from the same shop every Tuesday morning. He knew she always wore heels even though they made her feet hurt. He knew exactly where that puddle would be because he had checked the weather forecast and calculated the drainage patterns of that particular stretch of sidewalk. Marcus Reid didn't believe in accidents. He believed in planning, in patience, in the slow and methodical execution of a plan that had been 10 years in the making. Their first date was at a small Italian restaurant in Pioneer Square. It's a kind of place with red checkered tablecloths and candles stuck in old wine bottles. Marcus was a perfect gentleman. He pulled out her chair, asked about her day, listened with genuine interest when she talked about her work. He made her laugh with stories about his own job as an architect, designing buildings that would outlast them both. Like the idea of creating something permanent, he told her over tiramisu they were sharing, something that will still be standing long after we are gone. Sarah found that beautiful, the notion of legacy and permanence. Her own work felt so temporary, so disposable. She solved problems that would create new problems, drafted contracts that would eventually be renegotiated or dissolved. There was nothing permanent in what she did.
Ow.
Over the next few months, Marcus became the center of Sarah's world in a way that should have frightened her, but didn't. He was always there when she needed him. Always said exactly the right thing. Always knew how to make her smile, even on her worst days. He fit into her life seamlessly, like a puzzle piece she hadn't known was missing. He met her colleagues and impressed them with his intelligence and charm. He met her handful of friends and won them over effortlessly. He even met her parents during a weekend trip to their retirement home in Arizona, and her mother pulled her aside to say, "This one is special, Sarah. Do not let him get away." Sarah had no intention of letting him get away. For the first time in her adult life, she felt like she had found something real, something worth holding on to. Marcus proposed on the anniversary of the day they met. Back at that same rainy corner where Sarah had spilled her coffee and her life had changed, he had somehow arranged for a quartet to be playing nearby. Had rose petals scattered across the sidewalk despite the drizzle. When he got down on one knee and opened the ring box, Sarah didn't even look at the diamond. She was too busy looking at him, at this man who had somehow seen past all her walls and defenses, and decided she was worth loving. She said yes before he could even finish asking the question. The wedding was 6 months later. A small ceremony on a cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Sarah wore a simple white dress that made her feel like someone else, someone deserving of happiness. Marcus looked at her like she was the only person in the world, and when he said his vows, his voice cracked with emotion that seemed so genuine, so real. "I promise to love you," he said, "to stand by you, to be the partner you deserve. I promise to build a life with you that will last forever." Sarah believed every word. Why wouldn't she? Marcus had never given her any reason not to trust him. He was patient and kind and thoughtful. He surprised her with flowers on random Tuesdays. He left notes in her briefcase telling her how proud he was of her. He held her when she cried about cases that went wrong. About colleagues who undermined her, about the constant pressure to be better, work harder, sacrifice more. What Sarah didn't know was that Marcus was systematically dismantling her life from the inside out. It started small, so small she almost didn't notice. 3 months after the wedding, Sarah's biggest client suddenly pulled their account. They gave no explanation. Just a terse email saying they were going in a different direction. Sarah was devastated. She had worked on the Jameson account for 4 years, had built a relationship with the CEO that she thought was unshakable.
I held her.
While she cried that night, stroked her hair, told her it wasn't her fault. "These things happen in business," he said. "You will find other clients." She tried, but somehow, every pitch fell flat. Every meeting went wrong. Potential clients who had seemed interested suddenly went cold. Her boss started looking at her differently, started questioning her judgment in ways he never had before. Then her best friend from law school, Jennifer, stopped returning her calls. They had been close for over a decade, had supported each other through bar exams and bad breakups and everything in between. But suddenly, Jennifer was always busy, always had somewhere else to be. When Sarah finally confronted her at a coffee shop, Jennifer looked uncomfortable, almost afraid. "I just think we have grown apart," she said, not meeting Sarah's eyes. "We want different things now." "What are you talking about?" Sarah asked. "What happened? Did I do something wrong?" Jennifer's hand shook as she picked up her purse. "I have to go," she said. "I am sorry, Sarah. I really am." Sarah watched her oldest friend walk away and felt like she was losing her mind. Nothing made sense anymore. Her career was falling apart, her friendships were dissolving. Even her parents had become distant, making excuses when she tried to visit, cutting phone calls short. The only constant was Marcus. Her husband, her rock, the one person who still believed in her. "I do not know what is happening to me," Sarah told him one night as they lay in bed. "It is like everyone in my life is abandoning me." Marcus pulled her closer, kissed the top of her head. "You still have me," he said. "You will always have me." And she believed him. She had to believe him, because he was all she had left. What Sarah didn't know was that Marcus had contacted her client personally, had told them about irregularities in their account that didn't exist, had planted enough doubt to make them walk away. She didn't know that Marcus had shown Jennifer a series of text messages that appeared to be from Sarah. Messages saying terrible things about Jennifer's marriage, her career, her choices. The messages were fake. created using software Marcus had spent months perfecting. But they looked real enough. She didn't know that Marcus had been calling her parents regularly, feeding them lies about Sarah's mental health, about her drinking, about concerning behavior he had witnessed. He played the worried husband so well, his voice full of manufactured concern. "I am afraid she might be having some kind of breakdown," he told Sarah's mother over the phone. "I am doing everything I can to support her, but I think she needs professional help. Maybe it would be better if you kept some distance for now. I do not want her to feel like everyone is judging her." Sarah's mother, who loved her daughter but had always been slightly overprotective, believed him. Why wouldn't she? Marcus was so earnest, so clearly devoted to Sarah's well-being. The dismantling continued, precise and methodical. Marcus was an architect, after all. He understood how to identify load-bearing structures, how to remove them systematically until the entire building collapsed. 6 months after the wedding, Sarah lost her job. Her boss called her into his office on a Friday afternoon and told her the firm was letting her go. "Budget cuts," he said, though they both knew that was a lie. The firm was thriving, but Sarah's performance had been slipping. Her clients were leaving, and there had been some concerning reports about her behavior. "What reports?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her boss looked uncomfortable. "I am not at liberty to discuss the specifics. But I think it would be best for everyone if you transitioned out quickly and quietly." Sarah cleaned out her desk in a daze, her colleagues averting their eyes as she walked past. She had given this firm 8 years of her life, had sacrificed relationships and health and happiness for a career that was now ending in whispers and sideways glances. Marcus was waiting for her when she got home, his arms open, his expression full of sympathy. "It is going to be okay," he told her. "We will get through this together." But it wasn't okay. Sarah spent the next 3 months applying for jobs, going to interviews that went nowhere, watching her savings account dwindle. She started having panic attacks, waking up in the middle of the night convinced that she was dying, that her heart was exploding, that she was losing her mind. Marcus took her to doctors who prescribed medications that made her feel foggy and disconnected. He suggested she see a therapist, even helped her find one. The therapist, a woman named Dr. Morrison who had kind eyes and a soothing voice, listened to Sarah's story and gently suggested that perhaps she was experiencing depression, perhaps even a more serious mental health crisis. "I think we need to consider the possibility that some of what you are experiencing might be self-inflicted," Dr. Morrison said during their 4th session. "Sometimes we unconsciously sabotage our own success because we do not believe we deserve it." Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to say that she hadn't sabotaged anything, that things were being done to her, not by her. But Dr. Morrison was the expert, and Sarah was so tired of fighting, so tired of trying to make sense of a world that no longer made sense. What Sarah didn't know was that Dr. Morrison wasn't really a therapist. Her real name was Michelle Hartley, and she was Marcus's cousin. She had a degree in psychology, but had never been licensed to practice. Marcus had paid her $50,000 to play the role of Sarah's therapist, to slowly convince Sarah that she was the problem, that her own mind was betraying her. It was brilliant in its cruelty. Sarah was isolated, unemployed, and now being told by a medical professional that she was mentally unstable. She had nowhere to turn, no one to trust except Marcus. The sessions with Dr. Morrison became a ritual of self-destruction. Twice a week, Sarah would sit in that office, with its soft lighting and abstract paintings, pouring out her confusion and pain to a woman who was being paid to gaslight her. Michelle Hartley was good at her job, perhaps too good. She had studied her cousin's plan carefully, understood exactly what role she needed to play. "Tell me about your childhood," Dr. Morrison would say, her pen poised over her notepad. "Do you remember feeling this way before? This sense that the world is against you?" Sarah would try to explain that she didn't have a persecution complex, that real things were happening to her. But Dr. Morrison would nod sympathetically and gently redirect. "Sometimes our minds protect us from painful truths by externalizing them," she would say. "Instead of accepting that we might be the source of our own problems, we create narratives where we are the victim. It feels safer that way." Each session ended with Sarah feeling more confused, more uncertain about her own perceptions. Maybe Dr. Morrison was right. Maybe Sarah had always been broken in some fundamental way and was only now seeing it clearly. Marcus would pick her up after each session, would ask how it went, would hold her hand on the drive home. He never pushed for details, never demanded to know what she discussed with her therapist. He was just there, solid and dependable, the one person who hadn't abandoned her. During this time, Marcus kept a journal. Not a diary of feelings and reflections, but a detailed log of his revenge operation. He documented every move, every manipulation, every small victory in his campaign to destroy Sarah. He wrote about it with the precision of a scientist conducting an experiment, noting what worked and what didn't, adjusting his approach based on Sarah's responses. Day 347. He wrote one evening while Sarah slept in their bedroom, medicated and exhausted. Subject shows increased dependency on primary operator. All external support structures successfully eliminated. Subject's self-perception deteriorating as planned. Dr. Morrison reports subject is beginning to internalize narrative of personal failure. Estimate 3 to 6 months until complete psychological collapse. He reread the entry with satisfaction, then locked the journal in his desk drawer. Sarah didn't know the drawer existed. Marcus had installed a hidden compartment in his desk shortly after they moved in together. A place to keep the evidence of his true self hidden from his unsuspecting wife. Sometimes late at night, Marcus would take out old photos of his sister Rachel. He would study her face, remember her laugh, replay the last conversation they had before she died. She had called him the day before the parking garage collapsed, excited about a new teaching position she had been offered. "I am finally going to make a difference, Marcus," she had said. "I am going to help kids who need it, who do not have anyone else fighting for them." Marcus had been proud of her, had told her she was going to be an amazing teacher. He had promised to take her out to celebrate that weekend. But the weekend never came. Instead, there was a phone call from the hospital, a rushed drive through traffic. A body on a gurney that looked like Rachel but somehow wasn't, couldn't be, because Rachel was too alive to be that still. Marcus had held it together through the funeral, through the investigation, through the civil lawsuit that his family filed against the construction company. It held it together right up. Until the day Sarah Chen stood in that courtroom and convinced a jury that his sister's death was nobody's fault. That was the day something inside Marcus broke. Or maybe it didn't break. Maybe it crystallized into something hard and sharp and focused. Maybe the Marcus who had existed before that day died along with Rachel, and what emerged was something else entirely. Something capable of patience and planning and cruelty. But sitting in his study with Rachel's photo in his hands, Marcus sometimes wondered if his sister would recognize him now. If she would be proud of what he had become, or horrified. He pushed the thought away. It didn't matter what Rachel would have thought. She was dead, and Sarah Chen had played a role in ensuring justice was never served. That was all that mattered. Meanwhile, Sarah's world continued to shrink. The panic attacks became more frequent, sometimes happening multiple times a day. She would be sitting on the couch watching television, and suddenly her heart would start racing. Her vision would blur, her throat would close up. She would gasp for air while Marcus rubbed her back and told her to breathe. Just breathe. The medications were supposed to help, but they only made everything worse. Sarah felt like she was living underwater, like there was a thick layer of glass between her and the rest of the world. She could see life happening, could hear people talking, but she couldn't quite reach it, couldn't quite connect. She stopped leaving the house, except for therapy appointments. The outside world felt too big, too overwhelming. Even going to the grocery store required hours of preparation, of talking herself into it, of fighting down the anxiety that threatened to consume her. Marcus handled everything. He did the shopping, paid the bills, managed their social calendar. He told their remaining acquaintances that Sarah was going through a difficult time, that she needed space and privacy. People accepted this explanation because Marcus was so obviously devoted, so clearly doing everything he could to support his struggling wife. What those people didn't see was the way Marcus's eyes would gleam with satisfaction when Sarah had a particularly bad day. They didn't see the small smile that crossed his face when she told him she had canceled plans because she couldn't face leaving the house. They didn't see the triumph in his expression when she broke down crying over something small and insignificant. Her emotions so raw and exposed that everything hurt. Sarah had become exactly what Marcus wanted her to be. Broken, dependent, convinced of her own inadequacy. She was a shadow of the confident attorney who had once commanded courtrooms and negotiated million-dollar deals. That woman was gone, replaced by someone who could barely function, who needed help with the simplest tasks, who had no identity beyond her illness and isolation. But something interesting was happening beneath the surface. Something Marcus didn't see because he was too focused on his spreadsheets and timelines and careful documentation of Sarah's decline. Sarah was starting to pay attention. It began with small things, inconsistencies that didn't quite add up. The way Marcus always seemed to know when she was planning to reach out to someone, and how those people would suddenly become unavailable. The way her job prospects would look promising until Marcus asked about them, and then they would fall apart. The way Dr. Morrison's advice always seemed to make her feel worse rather than better. Sarah's mind might have been foggy from medication, but she was still intelligent, still trained to spot patterns and connect dots. And slowly, very slowly, those dots were starting to form a picture that terrified her. She started doing small tests. She would mention wanting to contact someone and then watch Marcus's reaction. She would leave her phone unlocked and see if anything was different when she came back to it. She would tell Dr. Morrison one thing and Marcus another, just to see if information would somehow cross between them. And the more she tested, the more convinced she became that something was very, very wrong with her marriage. That was when Sarah found the business card for Thomas Webb, and everything started to unravel. Marcus was always there, always supportive, always understanding, never complained when she couldn't contribute to the household expenses. He never criticized her for the weight she had gained from the medications or the days she spent in bed, unable to face the world. He was the perfect husband, patient and loving and devoted. But late at night, when Sarah was asleep, Marcus would sit in his study and review his progress. He had a detailed spreadsheet tracking every aspect of Sarah's destruction: her career, her friendships, her family relationships, her mental health, her financial stability. Each category had specific goals and timelines. He was right on schedule. The thing about revenge is that it requires patience. Marcus had learned that the hard way, had spent years planning and preparing for this moment. He couldn't rush it, couldn't let his anger push him into making mistakes. Sarah's destruction had to be complete and total, and it had to appear entirely natural, like a series of unfortunate events rather than a calculated attack, because that was the beauty of Marcus's plan. Sarah would never know the truth. She would spend the rest of her life believing that she had simply failed, that life had dealt her a bad hand, that she was fundamentally broken in some way. The truth that someone had deliberately dismantled her entire existence would never occur to her. And even if it did, she would have no proof. Marcus had been meticulous about covering his tracks, about making sure every action he took could be explained away as either coincidence or genuine concern for his wife's well-being. A year after the wedding, Sarah attempted suicide. She took an entire bottle of sleeping pills on a Tuesday afternoon while Marcus was supposedly at work. She left a note on the kitchen counter that said simply, "I am sorry. I cannot do this anymore." But Marcus found her in time. He always found her in time. He called 911, rode with her in the ambulance, held her hand while they pumped her stomach. He cried real tears in the hospital waiting room. He played the devastated husband so convincingly that the nurses kept bringing him coffee and tissues. When Sarah woke up in the psychiatric ward 3 days later, Marcus was there. He looked exhausted, his face unshaven, his eyes red from crying. "Why did you do it?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Why didn't you talk to me? I thought we were in this together." Sarah turned her face to the wall. "I am so tired," she whispered. "I'm so tired of everything hurting." They kept her in the hospital for 2 weeks, a mandatory psychiatric hold. The doctors increased her medications, adjusted her diagnosis, talked about long-term treatment plans. Marcus visited every day, always with flowers, always with words of encouragement. But Sarah could see it in his eyes now, could see the disappointment, the frustration. She was failing him too, just like she had failed everyone else. What Sarah didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that Marcus had found the note she left before calling 911. He had read it, had felt a surge of triumph so intense it almost frightened him, and then he had carefully rewritten it. The original note said, "I know what you did. I know everything. But I am too tired to fight anymore." Marcus had destroyed the original and replaced it with the simple apology. No one would ever know what Sarah had discovered, what she had figured out in those final desperate hours before she tried to end her life, because Sarah had figured it out. Not all of it, but enough. It had started with a phone call 3 weeks earlier. Sarah had been going through Marcus's jacket pocket, looking for a receipt, when she found a business card for a private investigator named Thomas Webb. On the back, in Marcus's handwriting, were the words, "Final payment. Close the file." Sarah had stared at that card for a long time, her heart pounding. Why would Marcus need a private investigator? What file was he closing? She had called the number on the card, her hands shaking. When Thomas Webb answered, Sarah had identified herself as Marcus Reid's wife and asked what exactly her husband had hired him to do. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, "I am sorry, Mrs. Reid. I cannot discuss client matters. You should talk to your husband." But Sarah pressed him, using the lawyer's skills that had once made her formidable. She threatened to file complaints, to report him to whatever licensing board governed private investigators. She played hurt and confused, suggested that Marcus might be in trouble, and she was trying to help him. Finally, Thomas Webb had sighed and said, "Look, I do background checks. That is all I do. Your husband hired me to run comprehensive backgrounds on a lot of people. Your colleagues, your friends, your family. I gave him everything he asked for and closed the file. That is all I know." Sarah had thanked him and hung up, her mind racing. Why would Marcus need background checks on everyone in her life? Unless she had spent the next 3 weeks digging, using skills she had learned in law school to trace digital footprints and financial records. It was slow work, made harder by the medications that made her thoughts fuzzy, by the depression that made it hard to get out of bed. But she kept going, driven by a growing certainty that something was very, very wrong. She found the payments to Michelle Hartley, found the connection between her and Marcus. She found evidence of email accounts Marcus had created using variations of her name, found messages sent from those accounts saying things she never said. She found evidence of phone calls to her former boss, to her parents, to Jennifer. The picture that emerged was horrifying in its completeness. Marcus hadn't just married her. He had systematically destroyed her entire life, had turned everyone against her, had convinced the world that she was unstable and unreliable. But why? That was the question that haunted Sarah in those final weeks. What had she done to deserve this? How had she hurt Marcus so badly that he would dedicate years of his life to destroying hers? She never found the answer. And maybe that was the cruelest part of all. On the day Sarah tried to kill herself, she had finally accepted that she would never understand. She was too tired to keep digging, too broken to care anymore, so she wrote the note, explaining what she knew, and took the pills. But Marcus had found her, had saved her, had erased the evidence of her discovery. And now Sarah was in a psychiatric hospital. Everyone believed she was having a mental breakdown, and Marcus's plan was nearly complete. When Sarah was released from the hospital, Marcus took her home to a house he had redecorated. He had removed all the mirrors, concerned that she might be triggered by her own reflection. He had installed locks on the medicine cabinet and the knife drawer. Safety measures that felt like love but were really just another form of control. Sarah moved through the house like a ghost, taking her pills, attending her therapy sessions with fake Dr. Morrison, trying to remember what it felt like to be alive. Marcus was always there, always watching, always caring for her with a devotion that should have felt comforting, but instead felt suffocating. 3 months after the suicide attempt, Sarah disappeared. Marcus came home from work one Tuesday evening to find the house empty. Sarah's phone was on the kitchen counter. Her wallet was in her purse. Her medications were still in the cabinet, but Sarah was gone. Marcus called the police, filed a missing persons report, played the frantic husband calling everyone he could think of. The police investigated, but there were no leads, no clues. Sarah Chen had simply vanished. The investigation went on for months. Marcus appeared on local news pleading for information about his missing wife. He offered a reward. He hired more investigators. He did everything a loving husband should do. But as the months turned into a year, the searches became less frequent, the media attention faded. And eventually Sarah Chen became just another cold case, another person who had walked away from their life and never looked back. Marcus sold the house and moved to Portland, started fresh with a new job and a new life. Sometimes, late at night, he would think about Sarah and feel a strange emptiness. The revenge he had worked so hard for, had planned so meticulously, felt hollow now that it was complete. He had won. He had destroyed Sarah Chen so completely that she had literally disappeared from existence. But the victory felt meaningless without an audience, without someone to witness his triumph. What Marcus never knew, what he would never discover, was that Sarah hadn't disappeared. She had escaped. On that Tuesday evening, 3 months after her suicide attempt, Sarah had walked out of the house with nothing but the clothes on her back and started running. She ran until her lungs burned, until her legs gave out, until she collapsed in an alley 3 miles from home. And there, sitting in the filth and darkness, Sarah made a decision. She could keep running, could try to build a new life somewhere far away, could spend the rest of her days looking over her shoulder. Or she could do something else. Something Marcus would never see coming. She could become someone he couldn't destroy. It took Sarah for years to become that person. For years of living off the grid, working cash jobs, slowly rebuilding herself from nothing. She changed her name, changed her appearance, changed everything about herself that Marcus might recognize. She stopped taking the medications that had made her foggy and compliant. She stopped believing the narrative that she was broken and unstable. Instead, she started to get angry. Not the hot, explosive anger that burns itself out quickly, but the cold, patient anger that can sustain itself for years. The same kind of anger that had fueled Marcus. Sarah learned everything she could about her husband, his real history, his family, his past. And slowly, piece by piece, she uncovered the truth about why Marcus had married her. It all came back to a case Sarah had worked on 6 years before she met Marcus. A wrongful death suit against a construction company whose faulty building design had resulted in the collapse of a parking garage. 11 people had died in that collapse, including a woman named Reid, Marcus's younger sister. Sarah had represented the construction company. She had argued successfully that the collapse was due to unforeseen geological factors, not faulty design. The company had been acquitted, had faced no consequences for the 11 deaths. Sarah barely remembered the case. It was just one of dozens she had worked on that year. Just another problem to solve, another client to defend. She had never thought about the families of the victims, had never considered the lives destroyed by her legal maneuvering. But Marcus had thought about it. For 10 years, Marcus had thought about nothing else. His sister had been 24 years old, just starting her career as a teacher, when that parking garage had collapsed on her. Marcus had been there when they pulled her body from the rubble. He had held her hand one last time as they loaded her into the ambulance, even though she was already gone. And then he had watched Sarah Chen stand in court and argue that his sister's death was no one's fault. It's just a tragic accident. He had watched her smile at the jury, had watched her shake hands with the construction company executives after the verdict, had watched her walk out of that courthouse like she had and just ensured that 11 deaths would go unpunished. Marcus had started planning his revenge that very day. When Sarah finally pieced this together, sitting in a library in Sacramento for years after her disappearance, she felt something break inside her chest. Not her heart. That had broken long ago. Something else. Something fundamental about how she understood the world and her place in it. She had been so focused on her own destruction, on the injustice of what Marcus had done to her, that she had never stopped to consider whether she might have deserved it. Not the marriage, not the systematic dismantling of her life, but some kind of consequence. Some kind of reckoning for all the people she had hurt in her pursuit of winning cases and climbing ladders. Sarah thought about Reid, dead at 24. She thought about the 10 other people who had died in that collapse. She thought about all the cases she had won, all the corporations she had defended, all the time she had prioritized victory over justice. And she realized that Marcus was right. It's not about his methods, not about the cruelty of his revenge, but about the fundamental truth at the heart of it all. Sarah Chen had been so busy winning that she had forgotten to be good. The question was, what to do with that realization? Sarah could continue with her own revenge, could track down Marcus, and destroy him the way he had destroyed her. She had the skills, the knowledge, the motivation. She could make him suffer, or she could do something else. Something harder, something that might actually matter. Sarah Chen legally changed her name to Rachel Morrison. She went back to school, got a degree in social work. She started working with victims of domestic violence, helping women escape situations that felt inescapable. She volunteered at legal aid clinics using her law degree to help people who could unafford the kind of lawyer she used to be. She never married again, never contacted her parents or her old friends. She lived quietly and simply, dedicating her life to helping people rather than destroying them. Sometimes she thought about Marcus, wondered if he ever thought about her. If he felt any guilt or remorse for what he had done, probably not. People like Marcus, people who could plan and execute revenge with such precision, didn't tend toward guilt or remorse. But Sarah had learned something important in those 4 years of rebuilding herself. Revenge doesn't heal anything, doesn't bring back the dead or undo the harm, just creates more pain, more destruction. More people who wake up in the middle of the night wondering what they did to deserve their suffering. 8 years after Sarah disappeared, Marcus got a letter. It arrived at his office in Portland, addressed in handwriting he didn't recognize. Inside was a single piece of paper with 3 words, "I forgive you." There was no signature, no return address, no explanation. Just those 3 words in neat, careful handwriting. Marcus stared at that letter for a long time, his hand shaking. He didn't know who had sent it, didn't know what it meant. But something about those words made him feel like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down into darkness. He threw the letter away, told himself it was probably just some random piece of mail, a mistake or a prank. But he kept thinking about it, kept wondering who might have sent it and why. That night, for the first time in 10 years, Marcus dreamed about his sister Rachel. In the dream, she was standing in a parking garage, looking up at the ceiling. The concrete was cracking, spiderwebs spreading across the surface. Rachel looked at Marcus and smiled. "It is okay," she said. Maybe it wasn't even from Sarah. Maybe Marcus was just desperate to believe that his actions hadn't completely destroyed someone, that Sarah was somewhere out there, alive and whole and capable of forgiveness. He would never know, and maybe that was exactly what he deserved. 10 years after Sarah disappeared, a woman named Rachel Morrison died peacefully in her sleep. She was 52 years old, surrounded by friends and colleagues who loved her, who had no idea about the life she had lived before, or the man who had tried to destroy her. At her funeral, dozens of people showed up to share stories about how Rachel had helped them, had saved them, had given them hope when they had none. Women who had escaped abusive relationships, children who had been given second chances, families who had been kept together because Rachel had fought for them. One woman, elderly and frail, stood at the podium and told a story about her granddaughter. "My granddaughter was murdered by her husband," the woman said, her voice shaking. "The legal system failed her. The police failed her. But Rachel didn't fail her. Rachel helped me get justice, helped me make sure my granddaughter's death meant something." The woman paused, wiping tears from her eyes. "Rachel told me once that she had made mistakes in her past, that she had hurt people without meaning to. She said she was trying to make up for it, one person at a time. I do not know what mistakes she made, but I know she spent every day trying to be better, trying to help others. That is all any of us can do." Somewhere across the country, Marcus Reid saw the obituary for Rachel Morrison online. He had been doing a random search, just checking for any news about Sarah Chen, like he did sometimes late at night when he could unsleep. The obituary included a photo. The woman in the picture looked nothing like Sarah Chen. Her hair was different, her face was thinner. Her eyes held a peace that Sarah had never had. But there was something about her smile, something in the way she held herself that made Marcus's heart stop. He read the obituary 3 times, searching for any mention of a previous name, any hint that Rachel Morrison had been someone else before. But there was nothing. Just a simple description of a social worker who had dedicated her life to helping others, who had made a difference in countless lives, who would be deeply missed. Marcus closed his laptop and sat in the darkness of his study. He thought about that letter he had received years ago. "I forgive you." He thought about his sister Rachel, about the revenge that had consumed 10 years of his life, about the woman he had married specifically to destroy. And he thought about the possibility that Sarah Chen had done something he could never do. She had found a way to turn her pain into something meaningful, to transform her destruction into creation. If Rachel Morrison was Sarah Chen, and Marcus was almost certain she was, then she had won, not by destroying Marcus in return, not by seeking her own revenge, but by becoming someone who mattered, who helped people, who made the world slightly less cruel. Marcus had spent 10 years planning and executing revenge, but in the end, he had accomplished nothing except creating more pain, more destruction, more emptiness. While Sarah had spent those same years building something real, something that would outlast both of them. The irony was almost beautiful in its completeness. Marcus Reid lived for another 15 years after that. He never married again, never formed any close relationships. He continued working as an architect, designing buildings that would stand long after he was gone, but the work felt hollow now, meaningless. Sometimes he would drive past the spot where he had first pretended to meet Sarah, where he had orchestrated that perfect accident with the coffee and the puddle and the scattered papers. He would stand there in the rain and think about all the choices that had led him to that moment. All the anger and pain that had driven him to spend years destroying another person's life, and he would wonder if his sister Rachel would have approved. If she would have wanted him to spend a decade consumed by revenge. He knew the answer. Rachel had been kind and gentle, had believed in forgiveness and second chances. She would have been horrified by what Marcus had done in her name. When Marcus Reid died at 68 alone in a hospital room, his final thought was of 2 women named Rachel, his sister who had died too young in a parking garage collapse, and the woman who had taken her name, who had turned tragedy into purpose, who had somehow found the strength to forgive the unforgivable.
August.
Died with tears on his face and 3 words on his lips. "I am sorry," but there was no one there to hear him. No one to offer the forgiveness he had never given himself. Just the quiet beeping of machines and the soft footsteps of nurses in the hallway beyond. Some people marry for love, others marry for money. Marcus Reid married for revenge. But in the end, the only person he truly destroyed was himself.